Kafka. You guys should all know her by now, as she was one of our first characters that we made contact with at the beginning of Honkai Star Rail. She's part of the Stellaron Hunters, wielding a sword along with the submachine gun, which is, in my opinion, pretty badass. So she's our 5-star lightning Nihility dot enabler for all future damage over time team comps, and she has pretty much solidified herself inside of HSR, as well as being a future-proofed unit, in my opinion, as new Nihility characters continue to be released. In this video, I'll be discussing everything Kafka, including her best light cones, traces to prioritize, relics, notable Eidolons, team comps, and everything in between. So make sure you guys subscribe so you guys don't miss any future guide videos. With all that being said, let's jump right in, shall we? Starting off with the light cones, we have her signature 5-star, which increases her damage by 24% and speed by 4.8%, which stacks up to 3 times every time Kafka launches an attack. There's also a little bonus effect, which we have called Erode, where if the user attacks an enemy who isn't afflicted with the status effect, there's a 100% base chance of applying it. And enemies afflicted with Erode will also be considered to be shocked, receiving lightning dot at the start of their turn. So a little bit of extra damage and shocked application, which is always nice. Next up, we have our contender for best free-to-play option, in my opinion, and that'll be Good Night and Sleep Well. So it's pretty simple. For every debuff the target enemy has, the damage dealt by the wearer increases by 12%, up to 24% if you have S5, and it stacks up to 3 times. So we're easily looking at either a 36 to 72% damage increase right there. Ideally, you're going to want to try and shoot for the max 5 debuffs on the enemy. But the good news is that dots also count as a debuff, and if you're running Kafka with another Nihility unit, which she'll excel if so, then getting the max application for the maximum amount of damage increase should be no issue. After those top 2 recommendations, there's still plenty of other options to choose from, like In the Name of the World, which increases your damage to debuffed enemies by 24%, and as we've mentioned before, dots do count as a debuff, so this should be free damage increase. It also increases attack percent whenever the wearer uses their skill, which is great. There's also Fermata, which is a Memory of Chaos light cone, so very easy to S5 as long as you play weekly. At S5, you'll be increasing your break effect by 32%, as well as increasing damage to enemies afflicted with shock by 32%. The light cone also features Kafka on it, so if you're looking for something to match, then there you go. Another light cone that's easy to S5 would be Solitary Healing, which also increases the wearer's break effect by 40%, on top of which, when the wearer uses their ultimate, their dot increases by 48%, that's lasting for 2 turns. It's very easy to get Kafka's ultimate back up, and we'll demonstrate that later throughout the video, so this could also be a viable option. The cherry on top is whenever an enemy suffering from a dot imposed by the wearer, aka Kafka in this instance, will be generating 6 energy back. This may potentially make it so you always have that increased dot up indefinitely, given the right situation. And last but not least, we have Eyes of the Prey, which increases your effect hit and dot damage. Now, Kafka surprisingly doesn't need that much effect hit, and it's very simple to obtain the minimum requirements thanks to her bonus traces, but dot increase is always good. Alright, so speaking of those bonus traces, this should be a good opportunity to dive into her traces and focus on what I would prioritize when leveling her up. Starting with her ultimate, for what I'd prioritize, this will help you get the ball rolling with Kafka. So her ult deals lightning damage to all enemies with a 100% base chance for enemies hit to become shocked and immediately take damage from their current shock state, if they were to have one applied. The enemies will also periodically take lightning damage at the start of their turn. Pretty simple, right? However, you're able to accelerate the enemies taking dot with Kafka's skill and the second trace I'd prioritize in leveling up. So her skill deals lightning damage to a target enemy and additional to enemies adjacent to it. If that target enemy is currently receiving dot, all dots currently placed on said enemy will immediately produce damage equal to 75% of their original damage. Basically, this means if you have other Nihility characters in your team comp that applied burn, wind shear, or bleed to the enemy, that target will receive that dot damage immediately without removing the dot itself. So they'll still be receiving that dot damage anyways once their turn starts. This is extremely good and something you'll most likely be wanting to do every turn for Kafka so you can rack up damage. Lastly, we have her talent to prioritize. Her talent allows her to launch a follow-up attack onto any enemy when her ally basic attacks, inflicting shock that is equivalent to that applied by her ultimate onto the same enemy. This trace is also really good at regenerating energy for Kafka when she does perform that follow-up attack, allowing her to cycle back to her ultimate a lot quicker. Now, her basic attack, you can level this up if you want, but ideally you'd want to make sure that you're using Kafka's skill a majority of the time to set off all those dots that are currently applied to the enemy, as well as some extra bonus energy on top of that. Her technique is very cool to mention because it's a wide range attack, so it's great for clearing mobs in the overworld or simulated universe if you wanted to make sure to include them all. All enemies hit will have a 100% base chance of being inflicted with shock equivalent to that applied by her ultimate, and this can also be applied to the enemies and not only the first wave but also the upcoming waves as well. So if you clear out the first group of enemies and the next group of enemies spawn in, then boom, they also get inflicted with it on top of that. Now, all the bonus abilities you should be getting anyways, but to quickly cover which ones to prioritize and stands out the most to me, let's start with Torture, which allows her ultimate to now set off all currently applied dots to the enemy that the enemy has instead of just shock. So a lot more damage the enemy will be receiving if you're stacking her in a team comp with other Nihility dot units. Next up, we have Thorns, where the base chance for target enemies to get shocked via her ultimate technique or follow-up attack increases by 30%, essentially allowing you to run less effect hit now thanks to this. And last but not least, we have Plunder, where if an enemy is defeated while shocked, Kafka regenerates 5 energy. This is what I was talking about earlier when I said that she'll be getting her ult back so quickly, because if you're facing multiple enemies, it's basically just a funnel of energy back into Kafka. And having shock applied to the enemy shouldn't be difficult anyways for Kafka, so win-win. As far as all of her stat bonuses go, you'll be receiving a total of 28% attack, 10% HP, and 18% effect hit rate. Now keep in mind, you only need 28 effect hit rate. I think it's like 28.2, so 29% if you want to play it safe, which makes relic building very simple since you only need an additional 10% from her substats. Pretty good. And since we're on the topic of relic and substats, let's just go over the best relics, main stats, and substats to look out for. First up, we have Prisoner in Deep Confinement, which will increase her attack by 12% for the 2-piece, while the 4-piece allows the wearer to ignore 6% of the target's defense. This does require the enemy to be afflicted with a dot in the first place, which is basically guaranteed one at least with Kafka, and the max will be 3 dots, meaning you can potentially get up to 18% defense ignorance. Remember, there's a reason why so many players kept running that 4-piece quantum set on every unit despite them not even being quantum type. It's because of the defense ignorance. Do not neglect that. If you're not running the new Prisoner in Deep Confinement set, you can always opt for the 4-piece Band of Sizzling Thunder, which increases your lightning damage by 10% for the 2-piece, while the 4-piece increases the wearer's attack by 20% when they use their skill. It says for only 1 turn, but you basically want to skill every time with Kafka anyways, so it kind of evens out, right? And if you really need to because you're struggling to run a 4-piece, then just opt for a 2-piece Sizzling Band and a 2-piece Prisoner, and that should suffice. Remember, always go for the substats over the set bonus. As for the Planar set, I'd recommend Firmament Frontline, as the 2-piece not only increases the wearer's attack by 12%, but if the wearer's speed is equal to or higher than 135 or 160, they will deal 12% or 18% more damage respectively. Even if you're not getting that 160 speed requirement, the 135 speed status is still sufficiently strong. Second, I'd recommend Space Sealing Station, which is a little easier in regards to meeting the requirements. The 2-piece nets you 12% attack, and if you can reach 120 speed, then you gain an additional 12% attack, which should be easy to hit those speed requirements if you're running speed boots. If we're comparing both sets, I believe as long as you hit the 135 speed for Firmament Frontline, then both sets should be around the same exact damage. All right, main stats for each relic will be HP for the head, attack for the gloves, attack percent for the body piece. You won't need effect hit since you only need 28 to 98% total, and the bonus traces already provide you 18%. And of course, speed for the boots. As for the orb, we'll go lightning damage and attack percent for the rope. Don't even think about going energy regen. Trust me, she gets plenty already. And as far as substats go, I'd focus on getting the last remaining 10% effect hit rate, so you can at least reach that 28 or 29% as a cushion. Then speed to try and push for that 160 breaking point on Firmament, followed by attack percent. Last substat can be a flex option for you to decide. All right, so notable Eidolons I'd like to point out would be her E1, which when her follow-up attack is triggered via her talent, there will be a 100% base chance to increase the dot received by the target by 30%. I do believe if you're running E1, you need to shoot a little bit higher when it comes to the effect hit requirements, so keep that in mind. Her E2 is equally good considering all dot dealt by your allies will be increased by 25% so long as Kafka is on the field. Really good for those dot team comps. E4 is more energy gain for Kafka when an enemy target takes damage from shock status inflicted by her. And lastly, E6 increases the damage multiplier for her shock damage dealt by her alt technique or follow-up attack, while also extending the duration of shock on the enemy target by an additional turn. Personally, I've been having a blast with my Kafka and she's only at E0, so that's my stopping point, but I can definitely see people wanting to shoot for at least an E2 for that team-wide dot buff. In regards to team comps, there's multiple ways you can play your Kafka. The easiest and predictable approach would be to pair her with other Nihility dot characters, while she will most definitely shine the most. The type of Nihility dot unit will change depending on which enemy you're facing. So if you're facing an enemy who is weak to fire, then Gweniphan is a good pair, obviously. Physical enemy, Luca and Bleed dot is very strong, and so on and so forth. You can also run a hyper carry Kafka, pairing her with the likes of Ting Yun and SW with a sustain like Bailu for that mono lightning team comp, or maybe even Kafka Ting Yun Asta for more speed for your Glamith to hit those 160 breaking point, while also providing attack percent. And lastly, if you really want to get crazy, I have heard a rumor of people running Kafka with crit, so apparently anything is possible. Definitely something I wouldn't recommend, nor am I trying myself, however. So with all of that being said, Kafka, in my opinion, is and always will be a future-proofed unit, as she is the enabler for all future dot units to be released. Her value will always continue to go up due to her unique abilities, and honestly, I don't think you'd regret rolling for her. It may just be a pain trying to build up so many other Nihility units for Kafka, so do keep that in mind before you take the plunge, but definitely well worth it in the end. But that's pretty much it. Let me know your thoughts about Kafka, and if you'd like to have her be a part of your team or not. Feel free to subscribe as we upload all types of guide videos ranging from character guides, mistakes to avoid, beginner guides, endgame content guides, you name it. Comment down below if you're also rolling for Kafka or not. It's been a pleasure chatting with you all.